I do like a meeting.
Ready to proceed, Councillor Webb.
Thank you. Good evening, welcome everyone. Can we have apologies for absence, please?
Chair, we have apologies for lateness from Councillor Mahoken.
Thank you. I haven't received anything else myself. Do we have declarations of interest, please?
Chair.
I see no indications. Thank you very much. Number 3, the minutes of the previous meeting. Do we have any comments? Because I do have a couple.
No.
Okay, no, on number 7, I think it was more to you, Councillor Stubbs. It says at the beginning, Councillor Stubbs was of the view that licenses should just cover tables and chairs as the planters and tubs traders used caused a real problem. I think we're missing the word not and also. Keyword. Okay. So I'm going to suggest that Councillor Stubbs was of the view that licenses should not.
Tables and chairs should mean tables and chairs.
Should not just cover tables and chairs, as planters and tubs traders used also caused a real problem. Is that, I think that was the intention of that statement.
So where is that? On item 7, is it?
7. There should be a full stop after Daniel O'Sullivan.
That's the view that licenses should just cover tables and chairs. No, that's right. No, I think it should, tables and chairs should just mean tables and chairs.
Okay,
all this
so
other stuff shouldn't be licensed.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Are planters and
Planted with dead olives in them.
Okay.
And full of cigarette butts don't enhance the public realm.
Should just cover. Okay. So they shouldn't be licensed. I mean, let's just make.
They shouldn't be licensing planters with dead olive trees in them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But then we would have a means of. But if that's actually the correct, I just wanted to,
Yeah, that was right.
That was correct. Then zip. And
to be fair, the officer thinks that they control planters and dead olive trees better if they are licensable.
So what are we saying?
So the minute is correct.
The minute is correct. The minute is correct. Then there we go. Thank you very much. And I couldn't remember in the second sentence what OLP stood for. Sorry. License before they get an OLP. And
Officer Licensing Panel.
Thank you. Spell that out because I just couldn't remember that. Yes, Councillor Snell? Or you just telling me?
I was just backing up Jerry with Officer Licensing Panel. It's a big issue in Dalston, but I've got a follow-up email going, not raising it tonight. Just to, sorry, slightly jokey, suggest to Vincent that given the extensive controversy about our various safe traffic neighbourhoods at the moment, I noticed he's objecting to any planters on the pavement, but I'm assuming that he doesn't mind having them in the roads, and I wonder if he's going to submit some ideas about how they could be done so they don't get full of cigarette butts and the other stuff he's talking about.
Yeah.
Is that necessarily for tonight? It's a planter comment. Sorry.
Is that a matter arising from the minutes?
No, not really. That was a Councillor Snell comment. Okay, I was just saying
Sorry.
That's okay. It's a fair point on planters, but I couldn't remember what an OLP meant, so let's just spell that out. Okay, and that was as correct. So can we agree those minutes, please? Yeah, can we agree them? Just
Agreed.
indicate. Lovely, thank you.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, moving on to item 4 then. Can we have the Environmental Enforcement Annual Performance Report, please?
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not quite sure how to do this because it's quite difficult going through all this virtually. So I will be very brief on this, and I will need to take any questions members may have. And I will make an assumption that councillors have read some of the report and they have questions on bits of it that's relevant to them and to the ward they represent. So if I guide you to page 8 of the report, paragraph 1.5, and paragraph 1.6, which covers the areas that enforcement covers. So it looks at issues including highway obstructions, including A-boards, littering, fly tipping together, so that dealt with according to the relevant legislation. And in paragraph 1.6, it's not just about that. Officers undertake a wide range of enforcement investigations related to antisocial behaviour with parties including Hackney Housing, the police, housing associations. We deal with noise nuisance. This gives greater resilience and ability to collaborate for cases to be prioritised using the powers under the Antisocial Behaviour Crime Policing Act 2014. And officers serve a variety of notices, including closure orders, closure notices, community protection warnings, and community protection notices and injunctions where necessary.
Chair, sorry to interrupt. Jerry, you're very quiet at my end. I don't know about anyone else.
It's kind of okay, but
No, I agree with you, Councillor Hanson. I can't really hear anything that Jerry's saying, I'm afraid.
Jerry, come nearer to your
Come
microphone.
near to my device.
Sorry, I just got kicked out of the meeting and it's still, I don't know what is going on.
Okay, I mean, I heard him. Okay, just a bit nearer to your device, please, Jerry. Thank you.
Right. If I
Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, Susan, we can hear you.
Welcome back.
We can't see you, but we can hear you. Very well. We did. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Jerry. Please continue.
That's all right. If I go to the background to the service, and if I go to page 9, paragraph 4.06, and this refers to the uniformed enforcement officers, that they are actually tasked on a weekly basis as a vital component of ensuring the service addressing problems and concerns of residents and other departments. And obviously, coordination and deployment of staff is done on an evidence-based approach to provide targeted action and patrols on a weekly and ongoing basis. And obviously this highlights emerging patterns and trends. And obviously it provides, we get a staff briefing of concerns officers might find when they're out and about, including officer safety, missing persons, suspected premises, suspected vehicles, persons, etc., to provide information and data to sort of fill information gaps that may be required. If I go on to page 10, and that's more at the top of the page, just follows up more information on that. And then paragraph 4.07, again on page 10, refers to the larger partnership tasking, which takes place on a monthly basis and is more closely aligned with the police tasking process. And it's there to improve joined up working across a broad range of council departments, including parks, children and families, youth offending teams, integrated gangs team attend as well for intelligence purposes. So, and the purpose is really to tackle, control and reduce crime in ASB. And the three main reasons that are included on the 1 to 1 and 2 on the paragraph 4.07. Obviously, for paragraph 4.08 at the bottom of page 10, the service is supposed to achieve some income, which we do through enforcement activities in preventing and tackling ASB, including highway obstructions, A-boards, and other nuisance type issues. And paragraph 4.09, if I refer to that on page 11, it shows that uniformed enforcement officers usually deal with one-off offences, and then more entrenched detail and complicated investigations are done by the team of ward-based principal enforcement officers who deal with those issues, and they deal with all the more complicated things, the closure notices, closure orders, community protection notices, etc. Somebody's phone. I will move on to paragraph 4, service highlights on page 14. And just the sort of issues we deal with, such as A-boards, which we take action about on a regular basis, unregulated waste. And going on to page 15, in relation to unregulated waste, shows the work we do with waste operations to reduce this. ASB, again on page 15, I said the principal enforcement officers deal with ASB within their nominated wards, and they sort of know what issues that are going on in the wards, and they attend relevant panel meetings as well. One issue which you may not be aware of, again on page 15, officers deal with are pirate radio stations. So the principal officers deal with that, again, removing illegal stations in conjunction with Ofcom, because they cause interference with radio communications used by the emergency services. These are normally referred to as by Ofcom, and we go out on targeted areas with Ofcom on a regular basis, based on intelligence provided to us by Ofcom. And then we have a contractor who removes the transmitters and any equipment as well. And this happens on a regular basis within the borough. Page 16, one of the highlights last year which we brought in was Cabinet approved a public space protection order for Wick Woodlands because of all the unlicensed music events which were taking place there. And it's for a period of 3 years from April 2019. I would say one of the successes with the PSPO is that the behaviours complained about have moved to the adjoining Hackney Marshes, and this year we've had to apply for an injunction at the High Court to stop UMEs at Hackney Marshes, and we are considering the potential to extend the current PSPO for Wick Woodland to include Hackney Marshes, but that would be subject to a wide consultation to ensure that everyone has their opportunity to say they're in favour for it or they're against it. Nighttime economy. Enforcement officers have always been involved with the nighttime economy, and they deal with ASB issues, including littering, urination, etc. in Shoreditch. From October 2019, so in September 2019, there was an enhanced police presence in the Shoreditch area that was funded through the late night levy. And obviously we were targeting people undertaking ASB. There's robbery associated with the nighttime economy and drug dealing, mainly in the form of nitrous oxide canister sellers who make a lot of money through selling that, and we deal with that through illegal street trading. One of the other issues we dealt with last year was London Fields, when the council decided to ban all barbecues in parks and public spaces in 2019, and we had a dedicated team in London Fields dealing with the issues associated with that, and that was seen as successful and vital in ensuring air pollution was kept to a minimum, as well as dealing with ASB issues associated with people visiting London Fields. If I skip over page 17 and go on to page 18, and obviously that's one of the big problems officers deal with is public-based ASB in parks and other open spaces, begging, drunkenness, urination in public. They're a priority for the service. There's obviously been a huge increase in demand on the service in relation to that. Paragraph 4.5.9, again at page 18, is noise nuisance. That's actually the greatest source of ASB. And in the last financial year, domestic noise complaints increased by 44% compared to the previous year. And obviously we were running out of our service 4 nights a week. Paragraph 4.5.10 is May 2018, we introduced a simpler and more streamlined approach for people wishing to make reports of noise nuisance. And while that has had its successes as well, it is also at the moment a manifesto commitment in the current 4-year cycle to improve how people report and how the council respond to ASB. and that is work in progress as an ICT transformation board, which is addressing that issue. We've looked at the noise nuisance webpage and we've improved that, and it is subject to further improvements. Page 19, paragraph 4.5.13, that relates to fixed penalty notices we've issued, and you'll see that the number has increased from 1,518 in 2018-19 to 2,222 in 1920. So that is a huge increase, which is partly due to productivity. We're issuing more FPNs through mobile devices. You will see the split between paper-based FPNs and mobile FPNs. We issue more there, and we can also deal easier with representations of that because they can be created automatically and cut down on officer time dealing with inquiries about that type of issue. And then on page 20, you will see table 2, that's a 3-year comparison for the issuing of fixed penalty notice, which shows a huge increase from 2017-18 up until 1920. And then on paragraph 4.14 at the bottom of page 20, I've just given some information on the ASB powers and the Anti-Social Behaviour Crime Policing Act 2014. So officers can issue closure notices. We have to apply to court for a closure order where there's serious and persistent ASB. We normally get that for a period of 3 months, and it can be extended for a further period of 3 months, but it can't be extended beyond the further for 6 months in total. And we also use community protection notices and community protection warnings as well, where there's ASB issues. And I have given an example at the top of page 21, the case where we would use a community protection notice where the behaviour is persistent. So somebody allowing their dog to trespass into a neighbour's garden through a broken fence, for example. So we would deal with that on an informal basis, but then we would follow up that with enforcement action if nothing else was said. And just at the top of page 22, there's a table showing the formal notices we observed in 2019-20. And I'm happy to take any questions from anyone.
Okay, thank you. I'll start from the top, which is Councillor Hanson. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, thanks, Chair. Looking at this table on page 20, we've actually got some hard data about service of fixed penalty notices. It'd just be interesting to have some narrative about the enormous differences between things over the last 3 years. So highway obstruction seems to have gone from 0 to 43.2, which is a huge difference. But I see we haven't issued a single penalty to anyone for dog fouling in the last 2 years. I'm sure that doesn't mean we've had no dog fouling in Hackney for 2 years. Are there differences in priorities for officers that have led to these changes? And if so, is there any way we can have some commentary on them in the report?
Right, if you look at table 2 on page 20.
That's what I'm looking at.
Yeah, so in 2017, we actually served 261 highway obstruction notices, but they were issued on paper. We've just transferred them from paper to mobile.
Okay.
But how about the question about priorities? Sorry, is that the same?
It depends what officers, it depends on the number of service, what service.
Yeah, dog fouling. I mean,
we don't see much evidence of dog fouling when officers are out and officers are out.
Then that's the answer to the question. Everyone's a good dog owner. Okay, Councillor. Are you happy with? Yes.
Well, I have to accept the answer that's given, that the officers don't appear to have observed all the dogs crapping on our pavements.
I don't think the dog fouling's as bad as some places I've seen.
If you don't see it, does it exist?
Yes, if a tree falls in the forest, I'm going to leave it there, Chair.
Black swans, thank you. Yes, Councillor Snell.
Well, I just want to say to fellow committee members that I read this report last night. I wrote to Jerry, and I had a reply by this afternoon, or late this afternoon, just before this meeting. And I did say to him, this is a really, really splendid report, and the next one we're receiving, in that it's a wonderful summary of what's going on. It's terribly easy to read. I would just say, Jerry, you write a great report. You don't have to take us through paragraph by paragraph. I think basically, if people are turning up on this committee and not reading those good reports in advance, then they shouldn't be on this committee, because I think we're pretty responsible councillors. Anyway, now the thing that I don't think you answered in the response that you sent me. I'm forgetting now. Yeah. You did various references to the late night levy. Now, I was, as a member of licensing committee, always an enthusiastic supporter of the late night levy, because basically the good operators were already doing it on a voluntary basis, and the chancellors weren't doing it. So making it compulsory was absolutely a good idea. Now, my understanding is that, yes, you're doing extra work, and of course you should be doing extra work in a place like Dalston that is impacted by the late night economy. And is that fully funded? Are you having to take money out of council funds to do that extra late night economy work? Is it fully funded? That's my number one question. My number two question, and I couldn't put it in my email earlier, is I was at a meeting of the Late Night Levy Dalston Pub Watch group this afternoon as an observer, and we ended up with one person, to save his embarrassment, I won't say who it was, rattling on about enforcement services scared to go in Gillette Square because it's become a no-go area, and a complete load of rubbish. Which, having been directly involved in that and been there quite regularly, I just turned around and said, that's rubbish. You know, we have problems, and we're dealing with those problems. But I wonder whether there is scope to advertise exactly what the enforcement services are doing, because there will always be people in our community who say we are not properly protecting them. And I'm not going to write to you about that, because I know it's rubbish. But we need to have stuff out there that says we were there 5 times, 8 times. We need to somehow get that message out.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Snells. Jerry, are you able to? Well, it sounds like a comms issue then.
Yes, we will look at that.
You.
Yes, we will get some publicity that. But Councillor Snell, as you're aware, the funding for the late night levy is overseen by the late night levy boards, and obviously the split of the income received, 70% goes towards policing, 30% goes to the local authority, and we've got 30% of that funding which we use for a wide variety of things. The late night levy does contribute a certain amount to enforcement officers. We could always contribute more, but we are where we are with the board and with the spending. And as everyone is acutely aware, a lot of businesses have not been open for the last 6 months, and we haven't received all the income we would expect normally to receive. So we would have to do less project work to achieve what we want to achieve this year. But that's a side issue. But as I say, we do get funding for enforcement officers from the levy. Probably not enough, but that's something we can review in due course. And your other question around comms, I think that's something I will take back and discuss with Emma Wynne, who is our community safety comms person. We can discuss with Councillor Selman to see how we can advertise the work better.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy with that answer. I see Councillor Race.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jerry. I've got 2 questions. One follows on from Councillor Snell's question on the late night levy. Obviously, and apologies, Chair, I'm just going to raise my own ward of Hogsmeade and Shoreditch, which obviously we have very specific issues around the nighttime economy, particularly around the Kingsland Road area, which was a particular problem up until essentially kind of COVID. I just wondered whether you could give an update on the sort of level of late night levy up until COVID, and I understand we were in a slightly different situation now, but in terms of how far that goes and how responsive we can be with policing areas that we know need policing. And I'm sorry, by policing, I mean small p, not kind of capital P. My second question is around
Oh,
We've lost him.
He's just dropped out.
Yeah, that happened to me.
Councillor Race, are you still there?
I am now. I was kicked off for some reason. I don't know why.
Oh, interesting. Okay, carry on. Carry on,
sorry.
please.
Oh, sorry. Apologies, Chair and everyone.
Carry on.
My second question was around: have we seen an increase in problematic fly tipping since COVID? Essentially, my experience of bins in my neighbourhood are that they're overflowing from people spending a lot more time at home. I wondered whether we'd experienced that spilling out into the streets at all, or whether it was just sort of the standard that we would expect to see that we are kind of challenging.
Right. In response to your second question, we haven't had an increase in fly tipping, and we have done a lot of investigations of premises that were open, say during COVID, and we have taken action against premises, say, who should have paid for collections and didn't. So people who were sort of thought they could pull a fast one on the council and maybe paying for 2 collections a week, and because they were open during COVID, they might have needed 4. So we have issued fixed penalty notices and taken enforcement action against businesses to ensure they're responsible. The question on the late night levy, if you could repeat that, please, I've sort of forgotten.
I suppose it's around our ability to redeploy kind of enforcement officers when we see changes in patterns of behaviour and changes in the way that enforcement is needed across the borough. My experience was that our late night levy and the enforcement was in South Hackney tends to be around Shoreditch, and to the detriment of the Kingsland Road essentially. And I know that work was ongoing with Councillor Salmon in particular to try and redirect that, but I felt like it wasn't necessarily as kind of flexible and dynamic as it needed to be in order to sort of whack-a-mole other areas that needed it more quickly and more directly.
Right, one of the things we've done is we're in the process of increasing, I don't know if you will have noticed it, the amount of CCTV in Shoreditch itself. So that project is still ongoing. And what we should be able to do going forward is sort of we work very closely with CCTV, and they can redirect resources based on that as well. So we're hoping with the increased CCTV in Shoreditch that will help. We have also installed 2 CCTV cameras in Calvert Avenue, either side. So we have got a good view of what's going on in that area now, which we wouldn't have had in the past. Those 2 additional cameras have been funded by the late night levy. So that will allow us the opportunity to deploy resources in other areas, which we may not have been able to do in the past.
Steve, sorry, Jess, or Chair, can I come in briefly on that as well?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I guess just in terms, because there's 2, in terms of police resource, there's sort of often in practice there's sort of emerging between non-levy funded resource because of the additional officer resource, particularly focusing on Shoreditch because of it being particularly problematic at the moment, and then also levy funded additional resource, which is meant to have the flexibility to deal with the borough as a whole, and it is something that we try and emphasise through the levy board because there's licensees that pay into that across the borough. So it should have the ability to flex to go to different areas round about the borough. The challenge is, as with everything, competing priorities. So issues sometimes a bit of a drain, but when we've had, and often where it is policing, it's about us also making the case because we can't direct where the police go. It's often us making the case to them as to why an area should be focused on. So, for example, the stretch that you're talking about, a lot of what we were trying to do as a local authority at that stage was essentially to make the case and explain to the police as to why there needed to be a bit more of a focus on that stretch. We have slightly more control over our own enforcement officers in terms of where we, well, I say slightly more, we have control over our own enforcement officers, albeit we still have to sort of deal with different priorities. And certainly that stretch was somewhere that we were trying to make sure that we were sending enforcement officers to at that point in time, although they obviously have less powers than the police do. But the other thing that we've used the levy funding for is temporary CCTV, so the removable CCTV, which again is something that we sought to put in the location that you're talking about. And once that's in, that means that we've also, you can in real time try and direct people to that space. So if we see it kicking off in a location, it allows you to then call through to the police or to enforcement officers to say there really needs to be additional resource in that space. So part of the thinking behind that temporary CCTV was to support that flexibility in being able to do that. Sorry, just a bit of additional context there.
Thank you. Thank you both.
You okay with that? Thank you. I had Councillor Fitzgerald Thomas. You will need to mute yourself.
Hi, Jerry. Thanks for your paper. I've got one main question and two other just yes or no questions. The first one is just to find out whether the wardens are working at the moment, I mean during this lockdown. The second one is to ask whether the wardens work actually extend to housing estate, and if not, who are meant to be responsible for the basic work that the wardens are doing on the street. And my main question is in regards to the collaboration working between the police and our wardens. And again, Chair, apology, I'm going to be specific to my ward because of the familiarity of issues that I'm aware there. And I knew there have been a couple of issues in Stoke Newton where the police have come back to us to say this is actually not a police matter, that the warden and the council are meant to be dealing with it. And till date, it doesn't seem anything is happening around those issues. I just want to about the communication between the police and our wardens in regards to the tasking or this tasking, or what is it called? Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you, Councillor. Officers we've never actually locked down. Officers have always worked from the day lockdown started. So everyone in the service has been working at some point in time doing what they normally do. So officers have always worked from March up until this day. So there hasn't been a problem with that. You asked about housing estates, and I did refer to the weekly tasking. So every week, uniformed enforcement officers are tasked to patrol housing estates where there are problems. These we get through intelligence from the police, or complaints we receive on our database, or information we receive from Hackney Housing officers. And Hackney Housing ASB managers sit on the tasking meeting, so they refer cases that they are aware of to us as well. So if there are areas that you feel that are housing that are not covered, then we need to know. Obviously, if they are a registered social landlord, i.e. housing association, then they won't necessarily be tasked to patrol them on a regular basis. And the other question you asked was about
the police to the council.
Yes, we work in partnership with the police and the council. I would say the ward officers and the enforcement managers, they speak on a weekly basis. They meet with the police ASB team and our intelligence hub manager to discuss cases and cases are going on. Also, if there are, we have antisocial behaviour action panels every week. So if there are cases, the place for the police to bring them is discuss them at the ASB action panel, and then a joint decision can be made as to what action should be taken in relation to any particular case. So again, I'd be surprised if the police are saying to you that the council should be taking action, because we work in partnership with the police on a regular basis every week.
So in a situation where nothing is happening in terms of or areas of not enforcement, area of antisocial behavior or disorder that the police thinks are not crime or not meant for them to be dealing with, rather for the council and the wardens. So
we would deal with those cases, but I would say to you that street-based antisocial behavior is ultimately the responsibility of the police.
Sorry?
Street-based antisocial behavior is ultimately a police matter.
So,
but if you
okay,
email me,
look, I'm going to, this isn't a chit chat. Councillor Salmon, I'll let you say your point.
Yeah, it was just because I'm familiar with, I guess, the kind of what Susan's raising.
Overlap, yeah.
In terms of, I have likewise sat in community ward panel meetings where the police have potentially referred to the fact that, and you end up with that really annoying for residents, sort of what feels like buck passing. I think for the avoidance of doubt, we have a joint responsibility for things like antisocial behaviour, and we've got different sets of powers for different things. So, ASB is a priority for the police, and it is also a responsibility of us as well, and we should be joined up and working together on that. There are lots of examples where we do that really well. I think, as with any large organisation, and particularly there's lots of churn in officers, you sometimes have answers that aren't the most responsible answers given in different contexts. I think if you're finding that you're getting that a lot currently in your ward panel meeting, it might be helpful to maybe raise it as casework with either with myself or Jerry, and we can follow up to try and find out, because it might be that there's been a breakdown in kind of communication between the principal enforcement officer for your patch and the officers that you're working with, because the worst thing is when people feel like they're just being passed about. So if there's casework or if there's a broader issue, if you maybe let me and Jerry know, we can follow up on that.
Thanks, that's quite helpful.
Okay, Councillor Snell, you are indicating.
So one thing that Jerry hasn't mentioned, I'll be positive about his response to my earlier email, was there's 2 apprenticeships, which we all welcome, and we talked about further development within the system, because for those of us who've been around for a few years, there was a concern in the reorganisation the service was being dumbed down. So it's absolutely essential that any people who are working in the service are able to develop and reach their potential. And so thank you, Jerry, for that reassurance. I think my other point, and this partly builds upon, what Susan was just saying, is we do need to know who does what. The clear failure in Gillett Square at the moment is the police. Let's not mess about on this. They don't have the resources to put into Dalston that we need, because they're all managing social distancing all over the place. And, we know where the problem lies, and I don't believe it lies with the council, because there's some stuff the council can do and some stuff it can't do. But my real issue, and I think I'm making a point rather than probably asking a question, is when we were talking on licensing committee, because I happen to be one of the people who is on that, about introducing the late night levy, we were given a very clear strategy from Islington. The key thing was that 70% of the money has to go to the police, but as long as the police let you have some control over where that money is spent, you're not too upset about that. And targeting where we're going, I'm not sure where this comes, to be honest. I'm not sure whether it goes to the licensing committee or whether it goes to corporate committee. But can I just put it back to officers that we need to think about how we're using that money? The person who's in our lead on it is fantastic, and it's engaged the Pub Watch various hospitality industry networks fantastically. But what we haven't seen so far is what we understood was happening from Islington, which was a very clear strategy. these are our priorities. It's taken a while to set it up, but I think we are now in a situation where we need that clear understanding of something we've agreed with the police. We've got a local management board, and what are our priorities? I mean, in particular, what I loved about the Islington strategy is a clear prioritization of these are the people causing the problem. And my personal view has always been the problem is more with the off licenses than the on sales premises. And I'd like to see a strategy. We've had it in place for a while. Let's get a strategy out. I mean, again, Caroline might be the person to respond to that. But
I think Councillor Salmon is probably because we set the strategy as opposed to responding. Councillor Salmon.
Yeah, no, I mean, on that, there's both in terms of, I think one of the positive things of the last couple of years is that also the tackling nighttime economy has been a very clear priority for the police, and they have also, like I say, I've got a dedicated team now whose job is also about problem solving round about the police, and they're working very closely with our intelligence hub as well, in terms of taking that more strategic response. I think the aim behind the last licensing committee that we had, Councillor Snell, the other week, was to try and give a bit more of a flavour of that via the report, and I think Sam's report was slightly better at that from that perspective. But perhaps we can think about how the next licensing committee meeting we can do a bit of a deeper dive about the broader, not just levy funded actually, but broader strategy to the nighttime economy as a whole, and probably ask Andy Port from the police along as well, who's been doing a lot of thinking about that broader strategic action plan. And yeah, whether we do it as a pre-meet or as part of the committee, it might be a good place to do it.
Okay, thank you. Are you okay, Councillor Snell? That's lovely. I'll take that as a yes. Any other questions? I can't see them. So our usual instruction here is to note the report. Are we all okay to note the report?
Noted.
Noted. Thank you so much. All right, noted. Let's move on then. So item 5, the annual performance report of the noise service. Jerry, is this you again?
It might be. Right. I would assume people have read this, so I will be brief on this.
Absolutely. Please take it that we have. As
well, I just want to refer people, say, to paragraph 1.
Your highlights.
My highlights, yes. Paragraph 1.3 and 1.4, page 26. So we take it, everything is based on the individual circumstances of the case, and there's a wide range of services and opportunity to apply greater resources to this issue. And I know one of the things councillors are interested as well in paragraph 1.4 is the granting of temporary event notices. And I have gone into quite a lot of detail in the report on that, and hopefully we'll answer questions councillors have on this, because I know it's an issue we get with complaints from residents that this business only has a license till 1 AM and yet they have X number of parties till 3, 4 AM, and they're all done through a temporary event notice. So that's something to be mindful of as well. And I'll move along to, say, paragraph 4.1.7 of page 27. And apart from the general work the environmental protection officers do, who deal with, say, commercial noise as opposed to residential noise, they also are a statutory consultee for licensing applications, temporary event notices, assessment of planning applications, in consultations on planning, and also they deal with construction site noise, which is a particular problem in Hackney as well, because a lot of people, there's always new builds happening. People are living in closer and closer proximity to construction sites, and they're living closer and closer proximity to commercial premises, because places that are built are closer rather than further away from existing commercial businesses. So that I will move swiftly along then to paragraph 4.2.7. I did mention this in the other report, in that we changed the system in 2018 of how residents reported noise. And what we actually look at now is, rather than looking at individuals, we look at the perpetrator address, which makes it more straightforward to pick up information. And in terms of domestic noise, the principal officers who investigate those cases, both teams use the same database for avoidance of any doubt. So we're not using two different systems. Everyone's using one system, whether it's for noise, whether it's for licensing, whether it's for commercial noise, domestic noise, or whether it's for antisocial behaviour. The same system is used, and officers throughout the service should be able to find out if there's an issue with a particular address, regardless of what it is. So they should know if there's any previous history on it, which is a question Councillor Snell asked me earlier on. So it should be reasonable with that. Obviously, we still run the out of our service, and on paragraph 20, then page 29, paragraph 4.2.10, obviously we get a huge number of complaints on a weekend. We could get up to 20 calls an hour, and I can say to members that for the first 3 months of the year, this year, the increase in residential noise was 162% up on the previous 3 quarters, the same period last year. And I then have some statistics from 2012 to 2017 on page 29, and that's just for historical purposes because the database changed to 2018. And then on page 21, chart 3, you have the noise complaints of 2018 and a chart of that. Likewise, again, page 22 is the same thing, but for 2019. And then on page 33, I just wanted to make reference to say that they're for the unique cases that came. Some of them, there are repeat cases, there are repeat calls, and obviously we have to research these cases, but the database we use makes it easier to track these calls because there's a way of checking them on the database to bring up the information. Paragraph 4.3 on page 33 is temporary event notices. I won't go into any detail on that, but it's a very good explanation of how the system works. It is complicated. It's not straightforward like everything. So I'm happy to take questions on that from members as well. And then the other thing of interest on page 35, paragraph 4.3.7, is the number of temporary event notices for last year. That's down on previous years, but some of that I would imagine is due to COVID, with lockdown coming in the middle of March. And paragraph 4.4, construction noise, some information on the cases there, and the number of notices that are served to restrict hours, and the number of consents which we give. And a consent is given where somebody wants to work outside of the normal hours. So if for some reason a construction site is having a crane to deliver lifting equipment or whatever on a Sunday, then we would issue a consent for that purpose. So we know we have control of it. And one really positive piece of good news on bottom page 35, paragraph 4.4.2 is that we did have 2 additional environmental protection officers on a fixed term contract till the end of March 2021. That has actually now been made permanent, so we've got additional funding. So there's increased resources being provided to the service on that.
Good news.
Again, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, I see Councillor Fitzgerald Thomas.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Jerry, for the report again. 2 questions. One of them is not part of this report, it's just observation in the last couple of months since the lockdown, just to find out what your experience in terms of data, what we have found 2 conflicting issues during the lockdown, many people working from home, and many people were not able to work from home who turned to other things like DIY, and there have been issues of excessive domestic noise complaint where I'm familiar with, so I'm not too sure whether you have anything about that. My question in regards to this report is now the CSEBR is now 3 years. Are we meant to have like a progress, do I call it a progress ladder improvement or the evaluation of how that has been working since the merge or whatever it's called? I'm not too sure if we're expecting something on that, or if you just need to give us a sort of verbal update. Thank you.
Thank you. In relation to your first question, the volume of reports of noise has increased significantly, especially domestic noise, where people were at home, people living on top of each other in flats, complaints about DIY, as you say, TV, music, people banging, crashing, washing machines being used late at night, all that sort of thing just increased hugely, and it has been a problem. But we have worked with housing associations and Hackney Housing to address issues where we know there are persistent problems. And your second question, I don't know if Councillor Selman wants to come in on that.
Hi, no, I can do. So what one was that? So we did. Was it earlier this year, Jerry, or last year? I have invited somebody in to carry out essentially a internal sort of review of how the new service area was performing, and whether it was meeting and living up to, I guess, the objectives that were originally set to it. Which was largely positive, but which included some recommendations for sort of changes that we could make, which Jerry might want to speak to, but where we essentially, there's then sort of a plan or an action plan to then tweak, I guess, how some of the recommendations coming out of that in terms of the structure of the setup and the team. I think one of the things that I've certainly found frustrating was the lack of kind of base case data at the beginning. So because we had lots of different sort of data sets, and also, to be frank, not very good data sets in some cases originally, it was a little bit different to have your perfect kind of base case data that you could then look at and to compare performance now. But there are things that you can look at. So for example, Jerry earlier was referring to the FBN data and the fact that there is now far greater issuance of FBNs, which is in part linked to the fact that we, be it introducing the mobile technology, but also in terms of how the resource is being kind of used and directed, that we're able to be slightly more efficient in terms of how we're using the resource. And then sitting in parallel, and this partly ties in with, I think, some of the stuff that came up last time, which was about reporting, is working with the ICT team, both to improve the reporting experience for people, but also that how we capture data, so that we're hopefully able to have a better sense of sort of measuring and monitoring service performance as well. So as Karen from our intelligence and analysis team would say, one of the things she finds quite frustrating sometimes is the ability to collate some of our noise data, for example, but where we're working with ICT to think about ways where we can improve our system so that we can collect that better, which will also allow us to have a better sense of kind of service performance, which is the kind of thing that I can imagine will end up being reported here. But yeah, I guess in direct answer to your question, there was a sort of, we got an external person in to carry out a sort of audit last year, earlier this year, and the recommendations from that are then being used to shape the team.
If you're okay there, yeah, I've got Councillor Snell.
Thank you. That was slightly disappointing, actually, because I was reassured by Jerry's email earlier about the availability of data, and Caroline saying perhaps it's not yet there. Anyway, so the comments.
To clarify on that, I was talking about the initial base case data that we had at the outset of things. So we've got much better data now, but there's then a focus on continuing to improve how we collect data and also how we're able to cross-refer data in different systems.
Okay, so basically to say how important it is that we do have officers able to comment on new applications to planning and licensing. I've worked in local authorities that said, oh, we can't afford to do that any longer. It's a complete disaster. What you're trying to do is design out problems before they start, and we must always find space for officers to comment and help design out comments. And on that basis, it is absolutely the right move that we are identifying the source of the complaint rather than people who complain. So it's excellent that that move has happened. And we have had issues, and given the information Jerry gave me earlier today, I'm going to be absolutely on to licensing officers who come to committee and say, oh, I haven't checked the noise complaints. If Jerry says it's as good as Jerry says, they should not be coming to licensing committee and say whether or not they've had complaints about those premises, because that is one of the regular issues that comes up on licensing. I'm just going to raise a point, and I don't particularly expect a response tonight. But there needs to be, people don't see us as different bits of a council. They see us as one council providing a service. And it is a worry to me, and I need to pursue this because I'm probably one of few people here who's both on planning and on licensing. But it does worry me that things are being pursued within planning policies that go against what we would like as on licensing committee. I mean, I know, you know, I'm on this committee for anyone who's listening in from outside by virtue of being on planning committee, but I do perceive it to the public as the one where we should be bringing our enforcement services together and making sure they work together. And it's not a perfect system, but it's very important, for example, that something that we think is vital on licensing, that we control access to outside drinking areas, and that's under the control of the people who we give a license to, doesn't seem to feature in planning areas. So can I just flag up for future work by Jerry and Caroline and anybody else, that we need to have policies that are consistent between each other. I'm just making a point, minute it, I don't really want to develop it here.
All right. I see Councillor Stops. We might be talking at different ends here. Thank you, Councillor. Hang up. Can Councillor Stops be muted?
You're on mute, Vincent.
Is that it?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Jerry talked about TENs. I mean, our old development control manager, Femi, used to say, just because you've got a temporary event notice doesn't mean you've got planning permission to have a 4 o'clock bar.
Absolutely. It's not the same thing.
You know, it speaks to Peter's, if I'm right, and that's the legal officer, but talks to Peter's sort of complaint, really. You can dish out tens as much as you want. They're not get out of jail free cards. You have to have planning permission as well to open a bar till 4 o'clock in the morning for planning reasons, nothing to do with tens. Tens were supposed to be about, you know, little old ladies in church bazaars selling drink, you know, a glass of wine for to make a bit of money, you know, and we should use all the powers that we've got, unless I'm wrong, unless the development control manager was wrong, and a 10 allows you to circumvent planning legislation.
I think it probably does, actually, because aren't you allowed to operate without planning permission for a certain number of days per year, 28 days?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Councillor Snell was raising a point, which is different committees, different statutory powers, right? You know, and when you think that one side can regulate the other, it is not so, right? So it's not that we don't have the will, you know, it's the state of the law and what we can do. And I think we are quite progressive in trying to get these two ends to meet, which civil servants and lawmakers do not fully understand, but we work within those constraints, and I do mean the word constraints. Did I have someone wave at me besides Councillor Snell with a thumbs up? I think Councillor Jenna Thomas, did you want to say something?
It was, thanks, Chair, it was me, but you said what I was going to say, so I don't need.
Okay, thank you. I do appreciate that. Okay, I mean, that's it. And to reiterate, Councillor, yeah, Councillor Stops?
That's a question to the legal officer, you know. Can she answer me now, or go away and find out? Does a 10 mean that you can ignore planning rules?
Hi, Councillor Stops. Is it okay if I answer,
please.
Chair? I will come back and double check that because the temporary events, they might end up being two different things. There's a number of things that might require, for example, a license, but also require planning permission, which are two separate things. So I'll need to come back and check. I will come back to you on that, Councillor Stops.
Thank you.
So just to be sure, you just want to know is does a TENS stop the planning side of it? So is there any if there are any particular examples that you know of or are dealing with, if you could email them to me, I can look into that a bit further for you.
Chair,
I don't know. I'm just
Hang on,
responding.
I've got
Gary.
a few. I can see a few people now. As I said, we have a law and our regulations which don't necessarily make sense. But Councillor Bells, you indicated.
Just to say that I'm absolutely certain tend to give you no exemption from planning controls whatsoever.
Absolutely,
No way whatsoever.
Completely. We are talking different things. We know that we've given permission for things that do not comply with various other regulations. It's the nature of the law. Planning doesn't necessarily have to comply with other regulations. Licensing doesn't have to comply with planning. And we are always, as usual, burdened with trying to link the two. I see Councillor Hanson.
Just to say, for the benefit of the person who's looking into this and everyone really, I mean, if we give planning permission for a venue and it has to close at, let's say, 11 o'clock at night under the planning condition, then the licensing committee won't give it a license to be open later than that. As well as looking into what the law says about TENS, I'd also welcome us looking into doing a compliance exercise that says when applications for TENS come in, does someone check that against, for example, the planning conditions for the venue? Because as Councillor Bell, I'm sure, is right, that you can't override the planning conditions, but does someone look into whether the 10 actually complies with the planning conditions, which is a slightly different question.
Absolutely.
So I'd really welcome some kind of compliance check on this once we've received the legal advice.
And even internally, I know that I certainly have come across instances where people are running things that do not comply with their planning application as opposed to their licensing. You know, it's us, as Councillor Stops has said before, that we have two different arms doing two different things that do not necessarily have to with each other, you know. With the building regs, the compliance, absolutely, seen it time and time again. Councillor Snell.
I'm not sure that's quite right. I mean, basically, stuff comes to licensing. Planning says this is beyond what they're allowed. We consider it separately as a licensing committee. We will always do an informative that says, well, two things that happen. Number one, if they can't sort their planning permission out, then it basically impacts on our assessment of whether they're a responsible operator. And number two, we will put an informative saying we don't expect you to do this open on these whatever we've given them until you've sorted out your planning situation. But they are two separate committees, and we are required by law to consider them as two separate committees. So planning doesn't override licensing, and vice versa.
Exactly.
Yeah, sorry.
And companies tend to work to one and not the other.
Yeah.
We are.
I think we all know, well, hopefully most of us know the complexities of getting the best for the people of Hackney out of the laws that exist, and half of them ill-conceived laws. Can I just throw into the debate one thing that came up today is those of us who are on licensing committee, you know, we're having to have loads and loads of legal advice at the moment about what the temporary changes mean for local businesses in terms of being able to extend onto your pavements. You know, the good operators, you know, they've engaged with the street trading people, they've engaged with licensing, they're out there doing their best, and I'm assuming that our poor old officers are completely overloaded on this, but it'd be fantastic if we could get a really clear guidance note, and certainly I'll be looking for officers, probably legal officers, because I think legal are the experts at the moment, to just say what these new rules mean, because a lot of people are just confused. And again, our mission as local councillors is to make sure we help people comply. We're not anti-business. We just want to help them do the best they can. And there's a real need for that sort of explanation, because, as I say, we're struggling to understand it ourselves.
Councillor Salmon, please.
No, it was just on that. In terms of sort of follow-up action on that, it might be worth that going as a request to Daniel Sullivan, who I think came to the last meeting, because he's been leading on a lot of the, as you say, Councillor Snell, interpreting the fast-changing environment that we're in at the moment, and he's certainly provided very helpful briefings to us as cabinet members. He has also, though, been working closely with the licensing team, who I think, as you know from having been at some of the drop-in briefings, have been doing their best to try and explain it to people as they go along. But Dan Sullivan's probably the best person to provide a user-friendly guide.
I mean, I would say with my interaction with the places around here, there has been no complaint about support from the council. The question is, as we all know, that the government guidance has been changing, I want to say daily, but okay, weekly. And we don't even know the rules about meeting with our own families, let alone running a business establishment. My heart goes out to them, but I do feel that our licensing team are supporting, the businesses that are trying to survive through this. I haven't had a complaint on that ground. Anything else? If not, then can we note the annual performance?
Noted. Thanks, Jerry.
Noted. Thank you.
Noted.
Always appreciated. All righty. So, Jerry, where are we going to have another meeting before December meeting for anything else that's not on our draft work program?
Well, you haven't approved.
Or is everything there?
You haven't approved the service delivery plans this year. They're delayed due to COVID. So whether you can squeeze them into the December meeting or have a separate meeting in November or the end of October to approve them is up to you and the committee.
Okay. Well, look, I'll let you, because there is a regulatory services service plan update. Is that not the same thing that's in the? It's a different one.
Different one.
And then you were saying that it would make it quite a heavy agenda for December?
Because the planning is on as well, isn't it, in December?
Okay. In that case, then, if we can, and I have discussed this with Jerry, that if we have a special, almost corporate COVID update report in November, that may make sense, as opposed to having something that's just too weighty in December. Yeah, I'm taking it that that is okay. So that would be an additional part to go in our draft work plan. Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
Alrighty, thank you very much. I have not had any AOB. No one's waving at me. 7:39. Can I thank you all for attending? Thank you all officers for your reports and your support. Thank you. It is appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Okay, thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.